Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Dave and Johnny live. I'm Dave. He's Johnny. See, there he is. He's Johnny.
What's up?
What's up, brother? Look at us, tank life right now. Too hot, right? Heat wave, baby. Both wearing those tanks. Is that the Bret Hart tank I got you?
It's one of them, yes.
Oh, yeah, I got you a couple Bret Hart tanks. Because you're a big Bret Hart fan, as am I. We are both Canadians. We are both wrestling fans. And we're both fans of Canadian wrestling. I think Canadians are the best at a lot of things, especially professional wrestling. I think we do it better than any other nation anywhere. And, Americans are really good at it. It is 4th of July weekend. Happy 4th to all of our American friends. But it is also Canada Day weekend. Canada Day happened July 1st, as it does every July 1st. So I thought, let's talk about the greatest Canadian wrestlers of all time. And I think we are very much qualified to talk about the greatest to ever do it from the Great White North. And, of course, Bret Hart has to be number one on everybody's list. If he's not, check your list. Bret Hart is not only the greatest Canadian wrestler of all time, he's the greatest wrestler of all time. Best there is, best there was, best there ever will be. And you know it. And Bret just celebrated a birthday yesterday, so happy 63rd to the Hitman, my hero, forever my hero, Bret Hart. 63 years old yesterday, July 2nd. Happy birthday, Hitman. We love you. We celebrate you every single day. At least I do. I know Johnny does too. But the Ringside Report universe, Wrestling Uncensored, Dave and Johnny live. We all know that our mission statement is to promote Bret Hart as much as possible, promote the greatness that is Bret the Hitman Hart, and solidify his name as the greatest wrestler of all time. And I want the world to know and recognize that the greatest to ever put on a pair of boots is Bret the Hitman Hart. Most people do recognize it. Most people that understand professional wrestling, they get it. Some people still stuck on the Shawn Michaels or Ric Flair train. You guys will come around one day because Bret the Hitman Hart, best there is, best there was, best there ever will be. That's my little Bret Hart rant for today. I've got millions of them. I love Bret. I love you, Bret. Johnny loves Bret. We all love Bret. Bret's number one, right? We're going to get to our top 10 list of the greatest Canadian wrestlers of all time. I'm seeing Jason Morneau Pete on the chat. He says, Montreal Screwjob, never forget. I was at the Screwjob. I think I was like 11. 97. Yeah, I was like 11 or maybe just 12, I think. And, I was there at the Screwjob. I've seen Bret Hart wrestle many times. I've met Bret Hart. I've talked to Bret Hart. I'm a big Bret Hart fan. I love Bret Hart. And Johnny does too. Johnny is the best. And Bret Hart is also the best.
You care to elaborate on how you met Bret and like what that was like? Like I know you interviewed him twice, but like meeting him, like that's a totally different experience.
Yeah, he was doing an interview, and I met him at the radio station back in 2009, 2010. I posted a picture on Twitter. You can check me out on Twitter at Dave Simon MMA. I posted the picture of me and Bret. Here, I could pull it up for you. See how young I look, man. I'm in like my early 20s. I posted the picture of Bret yesterday for his birthday. Happy birthday, Bret. Look at that. That's me and Bret. Look how young I look, man. I'm a baby. Look how young Bret looks too, right?
Well, his hair, I guess, is in better shape than it is like now,
Oh,
but
his face
that
too.
happens.
His face too. He looks younger there. He's like in his early 50s there. And now he's in his early 60s. And I'm in my early 20s there, and now I'm in my early 30s. Different, man. Different times. It's like 10 years ago when I met Bret the Hitman Hart. And it was something I'll never forget. I still remember Bret talking to me, asking me what I thought about the screw job, how I felt in the arena that night. And I felt like Bret was really interested in my perspective and what I had to say about the screw job and my perspective as a young fan seeing my hero Bret Hart get screwed, and I think it validated him in a lot of ways hearing my story. I'm sure the story of a lot of young wrestling fans, just shocked and saddened that the WWF would do this to their hero Bret Hart. And Bret, he was very interested in hearing my screw job story, the story of how I saw it from my perspective when Bret got screwed in my hometown in 1997. It was very cool, man. Very cool to meet Bret. He's a big guy. I was surprised how big he was, because when you see, growing up watching Bret in the WWF, he was always the small guy, but then you see him in person, it's like, oh no, he's actually quite big. It's like seeing a small guy in the NBA, like Steve Nash looked tiny, but if you actually see Steve Nash in person, he's like, 6'2". He's a big guy. He's not a small man, just in comparison, right? Bret next to Hulk Hogan doesn't look that big, but Bret next to most people, he's a big man. Good man. The best.
Well, I don't know about you, but like for me, like I'm rarely like starstruck anymore by a lot of like wrestlers, but I feel like Bret would be one of those people where I'd be like, wow, like you're so cool. I don't know what to say to you right now, because Bret's so awesome. I remember Piper was kind of the same way.
You never met Bret?
I only saw Bret from a distance. He was wrestling on like or he didn't wrestle. He just showed up at one of the Jacques Rougeau shows, but I didn't get to meet him, unfortunately.
Oh, you didn't go up to him and introduce yourself? Hey, Bret, I'm a big fan. Thanks for the memories.
Well, the thing is, like I was on like he was up on a higher floor, so I only could see him from a distance. All the other fans could see him too. I was just like with all the other fans, so I was able to see him in the locker room.
Bret the Hitman Hart. He's my number one. He's your number one. That's obvious. Let's get to the rest.
I feel like we need to go from like top to bottom almost, because like, yeah, we got number one covered already.
Okay. Bret is number one. Now, who's your number two? You know what? I'm going to tell you my number two first, okay? Because it relates to Bret. My number two is the guy that Bret Hart said was the greatest wrestler that he'd ever seen, the greatest wrestler of all time, according to the greatest wrestler of all time, is Gene Kanisky. Once known as Canada's greatest athlete, he wrestled in the 50s and 60s, and I think maybe in the 70s as well. He's a former football player. He wrestled Lou Thez for the NWA World title. He was a champion all over the place. Champion, tag team champion, NWA in Texas, NWA, all over the United States. He wrestled in Toronto, wrestled in Montreal. Gene Kanisky was a legit bad man, a legit athlete. When you're known as Canada's greatest athlete, that's a real deal. This guy was a real deal. I'm too young to ever have seen Gene Kanisky wrestle, obviously, but I have seen some video of him, some tape of his matches, and it's good for the time. It doesn't quite translate to now. It's totally different, right? Old wrestling sometimes, if you weren't alive during that era, it looks kind of weird. It looks a little slower than it should be. You know what I mean, John? When you watch kind of old-timey wrestling, you're like, eh. But then sometimes you see moves, and you're like, my God, they were doing this back then. And Gene Kanisky was a legitimate wrestler, legitimate athlete, and if Bret Hart says he's the greatest that he's ever seen, well, I think he's good enough to be number two on my list, all right? So I'm giving tribute to the old school a little bit on my list. I'm going to go with Gene Kanisky, number two. How do you like that?
That's pretty cool. With my list, I pretty much just put people that I've seen. I may have seen them like going back and watching their stuff, but I didn't see his, unfortunately, so I didn't put him on the list. Like Stu Hart as well. Like I heard about Stu Hart, and I'm sure Stu's one of the greatest of all time, but I didn't see any of Stu's matches, so I didn't put him on the list. And we didn't add
that guy. I mean, look at that. Look at that face, brother. That's the face of a wrestler. That's a guy who's been through the ringer. Gene Kanisky, brother. That's a real wrestler right there. That's a man. That's what a man is supposed to look like. Look at this guy. Jeez, brother. Gene Kanisky. Look at that chest. Look at that chest. Barrel-chested. Canadian wrestling legend, my number two. Gene Kanisky. He talked like that too. Kanisky, He had one of those voices.
I imagine he probably did.
That's a badass.
Now,
the flat top haircut there, my God. What a man.
Now, just to state that we decided the rules for this, that Brock Lesnar and The Rock do not count for this
No.
list.
The Rock's dad is Canadian. That doesn't mean you're Canadian. The Rock didn't live in Canada. He played football in Canada briefly for the Calgary Stampeders, but Rock is not Canadian. I mean, I would love to call him Canadian and embrace him as a Canadian, but he's very much American. I mean, have you seen his Under Armour line? It's very, like, pro-USA. The guy is not a Canadian. Grew up in Hawaii. He's not Canadian. I don't know why you want to call The Rock Canadian. His dad's from Nova Scotia. That's good enough. His dad's not on my list. You could put Rocky Johnson on your list, but he's not on mine.
And Brock Lesnar, because Brock's lived in Canada, I think, well over, a decade now almost? But
He
you say that
represented
doesn't count.
Canada in the UFC. He carried the Canadian flag on his back. You could buy a Brock Lesnar UFC jersey with, like, Brock and the Canadian flag. They all had flags representing them. The Brazilians had the Brazilian. Americans had American. Brock had the Canadian. But he's not Canadian. Come on. He's not born here. And Jericho, I understand he's not born here, but he grew up here. He's from Winnipeg, you idiot. I just heard him do a Canada Day special podcast. If Brock Lesnar or The Rock do some sort of Canada Day special podcast, okay, maybe we can give them Canadian cred. But right now, they're not Canadian, eh? They're Americans, bud. They're Americans.
Well, that's funny because I have Jericho at number 2 on my list.
Oh, yeah. That's a solid pick. Jericho's amazing. One of the greatest of all time.
I almost debated putting him number 1 because you look at his career and what he's done. He's lasted a lot longer than Bret did.
Yeah. But you look at Bret's body of work. You look at the excellence of execution. You look at his matches, you know. Jericho has had some great matches. But I think if you were coming up with a list of Jericho's best matches and a list of Bret's best matches, the Bret list would be longer. You know? Jericho's had some amazing matches, but like every match Bret had was amazing. You know? Like, he didn't have anything that was kind of, whatever. But Jericho, because of the era that he wrestled in, because he had to wrestle on Raw where you're given 4 minutes to do a match, you know, he's had some matches where you're like, yeah, whatever. Right? He's one of the greatest of all time, but he's not Bret. He's not Bret. I think even Jericho would tell you he's not Bret. Although Jericho's pretty full of himself. I don't know. He might tell you he's better than Bret. But Jericho's great, but he's not Bret. And he's not number 2 on my list either. Gene Kanisky is. Jericho's on my list, but he's not number 2. So Jericho is your number 2 on the list. Of course, Chris Jericho, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. I'm seeing people on the chat. Lauren Cronish asking questions about the Metro. Something happened on the Metro. I don't know. I stopped taking public transit ever since coronavirus. And
what happened on the Metro?
I don't know. D.W. Ogilvy is also asking, Johnny, what was that on the Metro? What happened on the Metro? Did you post something about the Metro?
Oh, yeah. On my Instagram, I posted something because it looked like someone either puked their lunch or something.
Oh, and you posted that on Instagram?
Yeah, why not?
Gross. Good thing it was on your story?
Yep. It's still there.
Nice. Cool. I'm glad I didn't see that. It would have ruined my lunch. Okay, back to whatever we were talking about. So number 2, I have Kanisky. Number 2, you have Jericho. Number 3 on my list, it's time to rock and roll. This time, she's in control. Trish Stratus. Trish Stratus, very important in the history of professional wrestling. You know, I gave a lot of emphasis on my list to people that made a big difference in professional wrestling. I think that if you change the business, you got to be on this list. And if you're as great, you know, you got to be a great wrestler as well. But, you know, you make a positive impact on the wrestling business like Trish Stratus did. She's the first woman to main event Monday Night Raw. She is one of the greatest women's wrestlers of all time until Charlotte Flair came along and Becky Lynch and this new era of women's wrestling, Trish Stratus was hands down the greatest women's wrestler of all time. So I think it would be disrespectful to not put her, high up on this list because, there are a lot of great Canadian wrestlers out there, and you might say, well, Chris Jericho's a better wrestler than Trish, and he's had better matches. And yeah, sure, that's definitely true. And so is Chris Benoit and Owen Hart and a lot of other wrestlers, on the male side. But if you look at what Trish Stratus has done for professional wrestling as a whole, she's changed the game, the women's evolution of professional wrestling. I mean, Trish, she was at that Evolution pay-per-view that they did. She has pushed forward professional wrestling for, a whole generation of wrestlers and another generation to come and generations after her. She's going to be looked at as a very important historical figure. Trish and Lita, very, very important when it comes to the history of professional wrestling. And I don't think you can ignore that. I don't think you can downplay that in any kind of way. Trish is really important. You can say what you want about her matches. Was she Bret Hart? For sure not. But she was pretty damn good. And for her time, she was amazing, So, Trish, I have a lot of time and a lot of respect for Trish Stratus because she pushed the wrestling business forward. She's advanced the culture of professional wrestling. And for that, she's going to be remembered forever as an icon of the business. Trish is very, very important when it comes to pro wrestling. And I salute her. She's number 3 on my list of greatest Canadian wrestlers of all time. We salute you, Trish Stratus. We love you. Stratisfaction guaranteed.
Now, because we're not including Brock and The Rock, I did able to put on Trish on my list, but she's a bit lower because in terms of like greatest Canadian wrestlers, I look more towards the matches in terms of like what she's accomplished.
Sure.
But I mean, she's still there. You can't ignore what she's done, especially as like women's wrestling as a whole.
That's it. It's hard to put a list of top 10 greatest Canadian wrestlers of all time together without including Trish Stratus. And, for what she's done for pro wrestling, very, very important figure. Who is your number 3?
I feel like this is going to be a lot of Winnipeg, it seems, but the next one is going to be Piper, the Hot Rod.
Yep. Great wrestler. Changed the business as well. One of the greatest promos of all time. The Hot Rod, Roddy Piper from Winnipeg, you idiot. I'm seeing Jason Morneau Pete. He's got his list, his personal choices. He's got Piper at number 1. Mad Dog Vachon number 2. Piper number 1. A lot of people love Piper, man. Piper's a lot of people's favorite.
I debated it too. I debated it too. It was tough to put him at 3. I was like, man, it's kind of low for Piper to be at 3.
Yeah, Piper's a little lower on my list, but he's definitely up there. Piper 1. He's got Mad Dog Vachon at 2. Bret Hart. Bret with 2 T's. Come on, Jason. Bret with 1 T, man. Everybody knows B-R-E-T-H-A-R-T. Bret Hart. It's okay, bud. Lance Storm, number 4.
To be fair, WWF screwed up before in the past, I'm pretty sure.
Edge and Christian tied for 5. Jericho at 6. He's got Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn tied at 7. Dino Bravo and Rick Martel tied at 8. Martel getting a name on the list here. Vampiro at number 9. By God, Vampiro. He's not on my list. And PCO at number 10. I was a big Quebecers fan when I was a kid, man. PCO was great. But he did not make my list. Okay, so I have Trish Stratus at number 3. You have Roddy Piper at number 3, or as Santino Marella would call him. Santino Marella, also one of the greatest Canadian wrestlers of all time, did not make my list. Santino would call him Rodney the Piper, which I liked a lot. Rodney the Piper. Santino was so good, man. There's a lot of people that I wanted to include on my list that I just couldn't. I didn't have room for. It's only 10 names. Neither of us put Chris Benoit on our list, but I got to imagine if he didn't kill his son and wife and then himself, he probably would have been top 5 as far as what he did in the ring. By God, he was good. But because of the way he ended his life, he's not in the top 10.
Oh, he might be top 3 if that didn't happen.
He might be number 1 if that didn't happen, right? He screwed up his legacy big time. And it just horrible. But, Earthquake. John Tenta. He's from BC. Not on my list. But I wanted to put him there. I was like, oh, Earthquake. Earthquake was awesome. The Shark, man. The Shark. You know? Earthquake was great.
Kurgan as well.
Kurgan was not as great as Earthquake. You kidding?
Well, I met Kurgan, so maybe it's different.
I guess. Jacques Rougeau's not on my list. Is he on yours?
Sadly, no.
PCO?
PCO was only 11, unfortunately. He just didn't make the list, PCO.
Didn't make the cut. All right, I've got a guy at number 4 that I don't think is on your list, but he should be because he's a legend of professional wrestling, been around the business forever, trained some of the greatest wrestlers to ever live. And, I mean, not only trained some of the greatest wrestlers to ever live, he trained the game. He taught the King of Kings everything he knows. Vladek Walter Killer Kowalski. Killer Kowalski, born in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. A legend of the wrestling business. You know, been around forever. NWA, WWF. Let's see some of the lists of accomplishments here. I mean, of course, a Hall of Fame member, WWE Hall of Fame, Pro Wrestling Illustrated Hall of Fame, NWA Canadian Heavyweight Champion, WWF Tag Team Champion with Big John Studd, WWF United States Tag Team Champion with Gorilla Monsoon. Of course, he ripped off Yukon Eric's ear in Montreal in October 1952. Killer Kowalski is a legend of the wrestling business. Legend. You talk about paving the way. You talk about making a name for yourself that will live on. Killer Kowalski died in 2008 at age 81. Wrestling business is never going to forget about Killer Kowalski. This guy trained Triple H. He trained the game. When you're the game's teacher, I mean, first of all, he did a pretty good job. Triple H turned out to be a really solid professional wrestler. And, you know, you're going to get remembered. You know, Triple H will keep that memory alive. Kowalski trained many wrestlers, including Big John Studd, Chyna, Kofi Kingston, Damian Sandow, Fandango. I didn't know he trained Fandango. Perry Saturn, Tommaso Ciampa. I didn't know Ciampa was a Kowalski student. But you look at the great names that have come out of the Kowalski School of Professional Wrestling. And, of course, you know, the legend of Killer Kowalski. My dad would tell me about Killer Kowalski growing up, you know? I'd talk about Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior. He'd be like, oh, you should have seen Killer Kowalski and Edouard Carpentier. Kowalski was a legend, and he was a Canadian. So he's on my list. He's number 4, all-time greatest Canadian wrestlers. You got to give, you know, I know we didn't see some of these guys wrestle like Kanisky and Kowalski, but you got to give the old-time guys credit for what they did and how they changed the wrestling business. I got a lot of respect for Killer Kowalski.
Well, he's trained a lot of people that I've met in indie wrestling, so a lot of respect for that. It's just the sad part is the matches I saw was near the tail end of his career. Probably not the matches that he'd look back and say, like, that was some of his best work ever, unfortunately.
Yep. I think, you know, you got to pay respect to the legends, Johnny North, and I'm disappointed your list not paying enough homage to the old school, to the legends of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Kowalski is there. Kanisky is there on my list. I didn't put Mad Dog Vachon on the list or Edouard Carpentier, but they could easily jump on there as well. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see them in their prime, but you hear the legends and those names live on. And those names living on, that means something, you know? Wrestlers are easily forgotten. But, you know, when people are still talking about you 30 years after you stop wrestling, that means you did something right in the wrestling business. So Killer Kowalski at number 4 for me. Johnny, who's your 4?
I got Kevin Owens at number 4.
He's on my list, but he's a little lower. See, I think, like, I get it, but I think it's like, you're really going to put Kevin Owens on your list and not Killer Kowalski? You know what I mean? Like, Kevin Owens, he's good. He's had a nice little career, but, like, has he meant as much to the wrestling business as Killer Kowalski? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Come on,
I think
Johnny.
he's done a lot of great things in wrestling. A lot of amazing
Killer
things
Kowalski?
in wrestling.
More than Killer Kowalski. I think even Kevin would tell you, well, I don't know about that.
We're talking about the best wrestlers. We're not talking about what they've accomplished. We're talking about who's the better wrestler.
Sure.
I would take Kevin Owens.
You don't know, though. I would take Killer Kowalski. I'd say Killer Kowalski's probably a better wrestler than Kevin Owens. Era for era. I mean,
Yeah, I'd still take
now,
Kevin.
Nah, you don't know. You don't know, John. You weren't alive back then. You didn't see Kowalski. All right. Kevin Owens is a great wrestler, though. He's on my list. But he's actually on my list as Kevin Steen. Because I think Kevin Steen is better than Kevin Owens, but that's another discussion.
It's the same thing, really.
Is it, though? I like
It
Kevin
is.
Steen.
It's just WWE like Kevin Steen. That's it.
Yeah. Kevin Steen was better, though, wasn't he? He did a package
I don't know
driver.
about that.
Really?
I mean, his match with Cena when he came in, that was great.
I think his best work was as Kevin Steen. Anyways. Number 5, I have the Ayatollah of Rock and Roll, Le Champion, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, Chris Jericho. So my top 5 goes Bret, Kanisky, Trish, Kowalski, Jericho. I mean, we don't have to keep talking about how great Chris Jericho is. We do it all the time. He was great on commentary on AEW Dynamite this week. He's the first guy on my list that's still active. There are not too many guys on my list.
How do you feel about that, though?
Not many guys on my list that are still active. I have, 1, 2, 3, 4 guys. And one guy just became active again. He's been retired for a while. I think you can guess who that is. Jericho. Great. What do you say about Jericho?
Well, I just wanted to get your thoughts because I got this tweet about like the commentating was too much because there was 4 people there and it was maybe just too much to have that most of the show.
I was fine with it. I liked Fyter Fest. We did a Fyter Fest recap right after Fyter Fest Night 1. We're going to do another Fyter Fest recap right after Fyter Fest Night 2. Johnny may or may not be on it. I don't know. He wasn't on the last one. I don't think he'll be on
No,
the
I don't
next
think
one.
I'll be on the next one either.
That's okay. You got the Simon brothers in full effect. Shout out to my brother. It's his birthday today. Tremendous. Happy birthday.
Cool. Happy birthday.
So we did that. You could check that out, the Fyter Fest recap. I'll ask you about Fyter Fest in a little bit. Who's your number 5? Who rounds out your top 5? Greatest Canadian wrestlers of all time.
Rated R Superstar is number 5, Edge.
You went very modern with your list.
Well, it's the people I watched.
Yeah.
People I grew up with.
Yeah. Edge is great, man. Just had a fantastic match. Came back from, 9 years retirement. Had an okay match at WrestleMania, but then had a kick-ass match at Backlash with Randy. Great stuff. He can still do it.
Well, I think more of the stuff that, made him great.
Of course.
Like the matches he had with Undertaker, Chris Benoit as well. You can't ignore that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
His matches with Eddie. He's had a lot of amazing matches over the years.
Cena.
He probably was the one to really put Cena like on another level, really, that TLC match, because up till then, like Cena just felt like they were forcing it, but that Edge match, you really saw Cena in a different light after that one.
Yeah, it was another level of wrestling for John Cena. And as far as Edge, the matches with Cena elevated him to another level of stardom. You know what I mean? They both gained. Like Cena became a better wrestler through those matches with Edge, and Edge became a bigger star through those matches with Cena. That was a very important feud for both guys. Both guys' careers very much improved off that whole program. Edge, one of the greatest of all time. Of course, his TLC matches. He invented the TLC with the Hardys and Christian and the Dudley Boys. A legend. At number 6, I have Roddy Piper. Of course, one of the greatest of all time. One of the top promos. You had him a little higher on your list. Would you have him at 2, 3?
I had him at 3. I really thought about putting him number 1, but yeah, I had him at 3.
Who's your 6?
My 6 is Christian.
Okay. Great wrestler.
Great wrestler, who I felt at one point was like the best wrestler on the planet.
Yeah.
Like he was having the best matches.
Mm-hmm. I think it was when he was the TNA World Champion. That TNA World Championship run, like Christian was on another level, and I don't think there was anybody in the business that could touch him. Christian is the closest thing that I've seen to Bret Hart since Bret Hart. He didn't have it throughout his whole career, but like when he went to TNA, when he became world champion, and then after that, even when he went back to WWE, Christian was probably the best wrestler in the business. He was incredible. But he did not make my list. That's how good Canadians are at wrestling. Christian, a great wrestler who was the best in the business for a couple of years there, not even top 10 on my list because Canadians are the best at wrestling. Top 20? For sure. But top 10 greatest Canadian wrestlers ever? I'm sorry. But it's not time for the peeps. All right? I have, at number 7, the Rocket, the King of Hearts, Owen Hart. Because he's Owen Hart, damn it. He was great. I mean, what are you going to say? He was amazing. One of the greatest wrestlers of all time. His match with his brother Bret at WrestleMania 10 is my favorite match ever. So, yeah, Owen Hart inspired a generation of wrestlers, guys like Chris Jericho. Owen Hart was ahead of his time. Owen Hart was one of the greatest wrestlers to ever live. And, you know, we didn't get to see as much Owen Hart. Owen Hart, unfortunately, what people will remember is the tragedy that happened to him to end his life. But I choose to remember the greatness that was Owen Hart, one of my favorite wrestlers growing up as a kid. Owen Hart is on my list of top 10 greatest Canadian wrestlers of all time at number 7. Johnny, do you have Owen on your list? And who's your number 7? Tell me it's Owen.
Owen's actually number 8.
Oh, okay.
So very close, but not quite there. Number 7, I'm surprised I had him before you did. I actually have Kenny Omega at number 7.
He's my number 8.
Well, there you go. Okay, now it all makes sense.
The best bout machine, Kenny Omega. I think at this point, you know, based on what he's done, you've got to put him top 10 all-time Canadian wrestlers. He's so good, man. He's done so much in a short period of time. You know, we haven't seen the whole career like we've seen with Chris Jericho or like we saw with Bret Hart or Trish Stratus or Roddy Piper. You know, we've seen everything that they've done. With Kenny Omega, you know that we've seen some great stuff, but possibly the best is yet to come. With everybody else on my list, except for maybe Kevin Steen, the best is behind them. You know, a lot of them, some of them have passed away. Most of them are retired. Chris Jericho, I mean, let's be honest, his best matches are probably behind him. He's nearly 50. But with Kenny Omega, his best matches could be ahead of him. Yet, he's on both of our lists as top 10 greatest Canadian professional wrestlers of all time. That says a lot. Kenneth Omega. I have him at number 8. You have him at number 7. I had Owen at 7. Who's your number 8?
Owen's number 8.
Oh, yeah. Who's your number 9? I got Edge, the rated R superstar. Love Edge. Talked about him. He's great.
I put Trish at number 9.
Okay. I put her a little bit higher. I put her at 3, but that's okay. And number 10, I have Kevin Steen on my list as the 10th greatest wrestler in the history of this great country that we live in, Canada.
That's pretty good. Again, I put him higher, but definitely deserves a lot of respect. To me, he's the best Canadian wrestler I've ever seen in person.
Did you not see Bret Hart wrestle in person?
Yeah, but like I met Kevin. You know, I've actually wrestled Kevin.
Yeah.
You know, I never wrestled Bret. Like that's a different kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, you've wrestled Kevin, so you like Kevin. I like Kevin. I think he's a great wrestler. He's top 10, man. Top 10 all time for this country. And that says a lot, man. A lot of people didn't make that list. The Rougeau brothers, Pierre-Carl Ouellet, the Leduc brothers. You know, so many people not making this list. Samuel Zane didn't make the list, but Kevin Owens did. Kevin Steen, he made the list. Kevin Steen, you just made the list. Congratulations. All right, so to recap my top 10 list, I have Kevin Steen at number 10, Edge at 9, Kenny Omega at 8, Owen Hart at 7, Roddy Piper 6, Chris Jericho 5, Killer Kowalski 4, Trish Stratus 3, Gene Kanisky 2, and the number 1 greatest wrestler in the history of Canada. Of course, the best there is, best there was, best there ever will be, Bret the Hitman Hart, the excellence of execution. Johnny, you had Bret at number 1. Run down your list once again for us.
So I had Bret at 1. I had Jericho at 2, Piper at 3, Kevin Owens at 4, Edge at 5, Christian at 6, Kenny Omega at 7, Owen Hart at 8, Trish Stratus at 9. And I didn't get to say this yet, but at number 10 is Lance Storm.
Lance Storm. Contributions to the business for sure. In the ring,
amazing
incredible wrestler. Incredible wrestler. Yeah. I can't argue with Lance Storm, man. The guy was an incredible talent. So many people we could have talked about. You know, Luna Vachon, a pioneer of the business, didn't make our list. Earthquake, like I mentioned, John Tenta, you know, didn't make the list. My goodness, so many great Canadian wrestlers. Christian didn't make my list. Robert Roode, Sami Zayn, Natalya. I'm a huge fan of Natty. I think she's one of the greatest women's wrestlers of all time. She was really close. I was thinking about putting her on my list. Mad Dog Vachon. A lot of people, man, we could have tossed on this list that we did not. And that just tells you the depth. You know, Stu Hart. Talk about contributions to the wrestling business, but in the ring, I don't know. I never really saw him. I heard he was good, but it's tough to call. So, a lot of people out there. And, you know, some people you're like, oh, I didn't know they were Canadian. You know? All of a sudden you're like, huh? Oh, he's Canadian. I saw somebody said, I didn't know Roddy Piper was Canadian. Bob Cote says, I only realized that Piper was Canadian when he died. Because people were like, oh, great Canadian wrestler, you know? Sometimes you don't even know who's Canadian because it's not always part of the gimmick, right? So many great Canadian wrestlers.
Back then, like, he was kind of keeping it a secret, right? Because he didn't have work papers back then. So
yeah,
that's kind of why at first.
Well, and he had the whole Scottish gimmick, you know, Roddy Piper. And he wrestled a lot in Seattle. You know, he kind of came up in Washington as a young wrestler. So people kind of figured he was from there, I think. People didn't really know. Pat Patterson. You want to talk about great wrestlers from Canada, right? Pat Patterson. That guy made
one of the greatest minds in wrestling, that's for sure.
Huge imprint on the business. He invented the Royal Rumble. I mean, a lot of talent, man. A lot of talent has come from this country. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. A country of 30 million some odd people producing so many great professional wrestlers. It's kind of weird that we're so good at wrestling. Like, why is it that Canadians just kind of take to it? I mean, we're close to Americans, you know. We're right there. We're next to them. We're seeing the culture. Something about Canadians, man. Really good at professional wrestling. And really good at training professional wrestlers. You know, Stu Hart, Killer Kowalski, Lance Storm. Some of the greatest trainers of professional wrestlers of all time. Pat Patterson, great mind for the business. Like, man. Don Callis runs Impact Wrestling with Scott D'Amore, another great wrestling trainer. Like, it's kind of crazy. Tyler Breeze is Canadian. Of course, Sylvain was Canadian and still is, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Rene Dupree is Canadian. His father, Emile Dupree. Johnny North is Canadian. Green Phantom
Dave,
is Canadian.
Dave Simon, right?
I am not a wrestler, though.
Well, Canadian, Canadian personality in wrestling.
As far as great minds for the business, contributions to the business, a legend in the wrestling business, a historical figure who has forced change and been a positive influence on professional wrestling. Yes, of course, me. Yeah, 100%.
There you go.
What a great mind for the business. What a legend of wrestling I am, Johnny North. I want to be inducted into a wrestling Hall of Fame one day, all right? That would be the greatest thing ever. Somebody inducted me into a wrestling Hall of Fame. I'd be like, I think you got the wrong guy.
No, you wouldn't be surprised.
You never know, man. We keep doing this. Might happen. It might happen. Oh, boy. Johnny North, what did you think of Fyter Fest?
I thought it was all right. It just, if this was supposed to be a pay-per-view, I thought I was very disappointed to be at first. Like, this was a good episode of Dynamite, but for a pay-per-view, I was like, ooh, this isn't that great.
It was solid.
What I found really hilarious was, like, your favorite match, then your match you hated the most, and then I saw Dave Meltzer's favorite match, and his favorite match was the match you hated the most. And to me, that was hilarious. That you guys had completely opposite ways of looking at it. Because I think you hated the Luchasaurus match, and he loved the Luchasaurus match.
Why? What's the matter with him?
Well, I mean, he looked at it differently. I mean, you looked at it as like, oh, these guys are too green. He looked at it in terms of like, this is the future of wrestling right here. Like, there's going to be bumps in the road, but it really showed you what they can do going forward.
I figured that future of wrestling. What is he thinking, man? Fucking Meltzer. How old is that guy? What is he doing? He's drinking that AEW Kool-Aid hard, brother. How is that your favorite match when Luchasaurus almost breaks Wardlow's leg on that fucking dive? That was bowling shoe ugly, man. Those guys are doing too much, and they're just not ready for it. Why is a big dude like Wardlow doing a Hurricane Rana? It's like, why, man? Why? It doesn't even look good. It just looks like you're setting each other up for spots. It just looks like a stunt show. It doesn't feel like a wrestling match at all. Dave Meltzer's all about that goofy shit, eh? What's going on with that guy? Like, as goofy as AEW can get, he's like, yeah, I fucking love this. So good. Guy's like a bodybuilder or something. What the hell's going on there? It's gone to his head. It's weird, man. I thought that match was trash. That was my least favorite match. And what, he didn't like the other match that I liked, the main event?
I thought it was just okay.
That was really good.
I thought it was just okay.
It was a solid tag team match. That's what wrestling is supposed to be. Solid, believable work. Cody and Hager had a good one too, but the finish was a little weird. I didn't like that finish. I saw some people loved it, and I'm like, yeah, you people don't really understand what a fight is. Fuck, man. Some people in pro wrestling are just, like, confused. Meltzer knows better, though. Like, he watches the UFC. You would think he'd understand. But, like, I don't know. You know, wrestling is an art form, man. It's subjective, you know. I probably don't watch the same TV shows as Dave Meltzer either. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you both enjoyed the women's match, which makes me think that was probably the best match universally loved, it seemed, because most people didn't like that match.
It was okay. It wasn't, like, the best. I thought Hager and Cody, and then Hangman and Kenny versus the best friends, they stole the show. I don't understand.
I'm not going to disagree with you on that one.
Why? Johnny, why? Why can't Jon Moxley wrestle on Wednesday night?
I figured you were going to bring this up. Remember, I said this was going to happen, so they had to follow up with what I said. So
okay, but why?
They're just being safe about it because I guess it has been 15 days, and they want to make sure it's 15 days pass, and he still tested negative, so you have to wait that long.
I don't understand.
You don't like it.
If he tests negative, like, can't they just test him now? Like, test him today. Test him today, and then lock him up in a room for 3 days until it's time to wrestle, and then you wrestle, then you go home. What's the problem? I don't understand. He's got to be with Renee because she's got coronavirus. I don't understand. I know his wife has the virus, but I don't understand why delaying the match by a week is going to make that much of a difference if Jon Moxley doesn't have coronavirus. To me, the longer you stay with Renee in the house, the better your chances are of getting coronavirus, and the worse your chances are of defending your championship. When Tessa Blanchard couldn't show up to Impact Wrestling because, she's stuck in Mexico and coronavirus and whatever, they stripped her of the title and they fired her. They're going to do
totally
that to Jon
different
Moxley?
situation.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that whole Impact Wrestling deal, you know what happened there, right?
Well, they asked her to film like promos for the match coming up, and she didn't do anything.
That's bullshit. Here's what really happened, okay? Tessa's contract was running out, right? Her contract was up in like a couple weeks. Impact wanted her to re-sign a deal. Tessa said, I don't know this for a fact, but let's just say that this is what makes sense. Tessa said, okay, I'll sign your contract, but I'm your world champion, so you're going to have to pay me. Like, I want more money. Impact said, well, you're asking for too much money. Tessa said, yeah, well, I'm your champion, give me the contract that I want. So then Impact says, oh, Tessa didn't want to film these videos. But what's really the deal? Like, if your world champion's contract is running out and you can't sign her to a new deal, isn't that the reason why you stripped her of the title and kind of cut ties? It's not because she didn't want to film a video. It's because you couldn't sign her to a new contract and you couldn't get her to come back into the United States to drop the title. That's what really happened. Impact Wrestling didn't want to look like the bad guy, so they blamed it on Tessa. They said, oh, Tessa, she didn't want to work. She didn't want to come from Mexico. Well, she lives in Mexico. She can't travel to the United States, first of all. And, okay, she didn't want to send videos. Is that even true, or is that just part of the negotiation? They make Tessa look like the bad guy when really Impact didn't want to give her the contract that she wanted. That's how I see it. Maybe Tessa was asking for a lot of money. Maybe she was holding up Impact for a lot of money, knowing that she had them in a bad spot because she had the title. But to just believe the official Impact Wrestling story of, Tessa didn't want to shoot videos, so we stripped her of the title and we fired her. Really? I don't buy that story one bit. They couldn't sign her to a new deal, so they stripped her of the title and made her look like the bad guy. It's not a dumb move, but it's what they did.
Well, I'm sure she'll have her side of the story of it if she even cares to comment on it one day. But I think what she's looking towards now is either going towards WWE or AEW. I mean, Impact's in the rear view at this point.
Yeah, as it should be. As it should be. Big Johnny, we will be back for Wrestling Uncensored. Coming up, we'll preview the next Fyter Fest episode. We'll also recap SmackDown and Raw and even NXT. Io Shirai and Sasha Banks had a great match, and they spoiled the match for next week. Did you see that?
It was an accident.
That's great. One of the developmental talents took a picture of somebody with two belts. I'm not going to spoil it for you. You can look it up on the internet if you want. But so next week, Keith Lee and Adam Cole have a match for all the belts, the North American title and the NXT title, and the winner has, is double champion. So somebody won the match and has both belts, and they took a picture of the winner and they posted it. One of the developmental talents posted it. Only problem is that episode of NXT isn't supposed to air until next week. Episode 2 of Great American Bash. They did their Great American Bash special to counter-program AEW's Fyter Fest. Unbelievable.
And it worked. They won the ratings, so it worked.
Did they? Yeah. Well, good for them. Whatever.
And maybe this whole posting that spoiler, maybe people will be more interested in actually watching the show now.
Like a Mankind thing when he won the title and Shivani told everybody watching WCW not to watch, and then they changed the channel.
Again, kind of different because that was, people doing it because like the WCW was trying to do it out of spite. Where this is like, this was an accident, but it's like, well, now people want to see that actually happen.
Yeah, I'd like to see it happen. I'd like to watch it. I think you just spoiled it a little bit there, John, but that's okay. We will.
Not really.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about it on Wrestling Uncensored. Watch Wrestling Uncensored tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. right here on the YouTube channel. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and when you do, click the bell so you get notifications every time that we are on. I recapped Fyter Fest Night 1 with my brother this past Wednesday night right after Fyter Fest Live. I'll be back Wednesday night after Fyter Fest Night 2 to recap that. Thank you to Jason Morneau Pete. Says, great job on the show. Cheers. Thank you, Jason, for the super chat. We appreciate you. We appreciate everybody supporting the channel. Go to ringsidereport.net for more on everything. I just finished my little, this was a Minute Maid fruit punch slush that I got from McDonald's, and it was actually pretty tasty. So there's my drink recommendation for the day. Okay, John?
Yeah, I don't usually drink anything from McDonald's unless it's bottled water, so it's not going to happen.
I'm not recommending it to you, John. I'm recommending it to all the normal people out there who drink sugar drinks, okay? I drink sugar drinks. You drink sugar drinks. Johnny North is the only guy out there who doesn't drink the sugar drinks. It's summertime. A slush on a summer day is so nice. You don't like a slush?
I'll take an orange juice sometimes.
Goddamn bodybuilders, man. They don't listen to reason. They're not like normal people. Orange juice is fine. I like a nice grape slush from Dairy Queen. That's my favorite. Dairy Queen grape slush. Oh, yeah. I want one right now. Can't have 2 slushes in one day, though. That's not a good idea. I really shouldn't do that. Okay, John? Okay? You'd be really disappointed in me if I did that. So I'm not going to do that. Okay? I'm not going to get another
You
slush.
can do what you want. Don't worry about it. Don't think about me when you're choosing your drinks.
I don't want to give myself diabetes, okay? I don't want to have the sugars. So I'm only going to have 1 slush today, but I might get one tomorrow from Dairy Queen because it's so good. And if it's still hot like this, I'm going to need it. Stay cool. Wear a mask. Stay indoors. Avoid people. Don't talk to strangers. Take care. Brush your hair. We love you big time. RingsideReport.net. Follow Johnny on the things. North Genesis on Twitter. Genesis Johnny North on Instagram. Follow me on all the things at Dave Simon MMA. Thank you. We love you. Happy 4th of July to all our American friends. Happy Canada Day weekend to all our Canadian friends. And happy birthday to my brother friend. We love you big time. Goodbye. Bye, Johnny.
Until next week.